Hi everyone, and welcome to mini lecture 13. Today we'll be discussing the Chicago citation style. Before we begin, take a minute to gather the materials for today's lecture assignment. You'll need a blank Word document to do some writing and access to your current project draft materials. The purpose and goals for today's lecture are as follows. First, we'll discuss the purpose and place of Chicago. We'll examine different formatting considerations, and we'll also examine methods for in-text and bibliography citations as well. Why Chicago? Chicago is actually a formatting style that has been gaining a lot of popularity. I remember that all throughout my working on my bachelor's, no one touched it with a 10-foot pole. It was all APA and MLA, regardless of if I was taking a class in the English department or in communications or, life sciences. It didn't matter. It was either MLA or APA. It wasn't until I think my final year that more professors on the DSU campus started to ask their students to use Chicago as the preferred style guide and as the preferred method of formatting citations. Now, it was actually developed as a non-academic style. It was basically used for more trade journals and work still written by experts, but in non-academic settings, so in more professional type settings. However, I think just because it is such an efficient and thorough citation style, it's become very popular in many academic fields. So STEM fields especially are taking to it, as well as communications and business. And I will even say this, most of the journals that I am reading that are humanities-based are starting to use Chicago over styles like APA or MLA, which I find really fascinating. But anyway, if you are in STEM, communications, business, you will probably be asked to use Chicago more often than not. So when we think about the basic considerations of Chicago citations, there are certain things that we need to include. Now, one important thing to remember about any citation is you work with the information that you have. In academic writing, though, especially if you're citing academic journals, which you should be, especially for projects 3, 4, and 5, you're going to be able to check all of these boxes here under the needs to include. But, if you're citing something like a TED Talk or, a blog or something to that effect, perhaps for project 2 or maybe even for project 1, you include the information that is readily available to you as the reader and researcher. But if we were to look at this through, in a perfect world, if we could include all of the necessary information, we would need to include the name of the author or authors, because sometimes there might be more than one. You also need to include the full title of the article, also the date of publication, volume number, issue number, and publisher. When we think about the bibliography page, and that is the last bit of any research or argument-based work that you do, when we talk about the bibliography page, that's where you provide your readers with the fleshed out citations. And that gives them the opportunity to say, oh, okay, well, in this work, the writer cites Scholar A. Scholar A seems to be really interesting, and the way that this writer talked about them, I want to read more about their work. And so the bibliography page gives your reader the tools to find that information for themselves and read it on their own terms. But when we format a bibliography page, we want to remember to include a hanging indent. Especially with academic articles, you will find that, there are sometimes, upwards of 20, 30 citations, if not more, depending on the specific field. And what the hanging indent does is it allows you as the writer to design the page in such a way that emphasizes the last name of the author. And so because as you go throughout the text, as we'll discuss here in a minute, you're going to be referring to that author or authors by last name. And so when that's the case, if I see Smith and Adams on, being cited, I'm going to go to the bibliography page and say, okay, well, I'm going to look for Smith because that was the first author, and then I'll look for the citation that reads Smith and Adams. The hanging indent allows me to do that as the reader a whole heck of a lot easier, because if everything is flush left, or even if we follow the traditional paragraph structure of indenting the first line, it can make that last name that much more difficult to locate. So with a hanging indent, the first line is not indented, but all following lines are in that particular citation. We also want to remember that your bibliography page is also going to be alphabetized. So even if the first person that you reference, let's say their last name starts with Z, even if you cite them in the very first paragraph, they are going to find their way at the very back of your bibliography list. They're going to be at the very last entry probably. And so again, that just helps the reader to locate that information more efficiently. When we think about basic considerations in regard to formatting, we want to remember that all publications are italicized. Now, this will be your journal title. So, Journal of Molecular Research, Journal of Popular Culture, Journal of Finance and Management. So things of that sort. Same with magazines. So Time, People, Us Weekly, National Geographic. So we still want to italicize those popular publications as well. Movies are also italicized, as well as TV shows and newspapers. Now, when we think about publications or the periodicals, we can see them as means for distributing smaller bits of information. So you think about it this way. Journals, they distribute articles. Magazines also distribute individual articles, as do newspapers, articles and columns. Movies have scenes. TV shows have episodes. And so again, they're just kind of a vehicle for larger, more or smaller, more specific bits of information. Now, when we actually go to including those smaller, more specific bits of information, the article titles or episode titles, we want to encase them in quotation marks to, again, visually differentiate them from the periodical that they were published in. Authors are introduced by full name and then referenced to by last throughout the rest of your text. So if you were to say the first time that you reference a source, you would say, according to Dr. John Smith, blah, 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 direct quote, summary, paraphrase, however you treat that. So you'd introduce the source by full name, and then throughout the rest of the text, any other time that you refer to that individual and their work, you would say, Smith continues, or Smith challenges this idea. And so rather than saying Dr. John Smith every single time you mention this source, you would just refer to that person by their last name. Now, what's interesting about Chicago is that they use footnotes, and that's not something we commonly see in MLA or APA or other popular citation style guides. So let's take a look at what those specific formatting considerations look like. So when we've got, let me pull the screen down here a bit, when we've got print-based sources, let's look at books, for example. So the footnote, and that is going to go at the bottom of each individual page. Now, with Chicago, rather than including in parentheses either the page number or the year of publication or the title of the article, like you would see in MLA and APA, you rather do the superscript, like the 1, the 2, the tiny little numbers that occur after the source's name or after you have concluded talking about the source. So in that footnote, you would write first name and last name, comma, title of the book, place of publication, publisher, year of publication, all in parentheses, and the page number. So if we were to write a footnote citing this source, it would read, and we've got that corresponding number here, so this would correspond with whatever superscript we included in the body of the text, and that doesn't start over every page. Rather, you could have 1 through 3 on the first page, 4 through 7 on the second, and 8 through 24 on the third. So it doesn't start over with each page that you are writing. Rather, it builds throughout the body of your work. So going back to this example, we would say, Clay Shirky, comma, Here Comes Everybody, The Power of Organizing Without Organizations as the title of the book. Then we've got the place of publication, New York, Penguin Press, comma, 2008. We close the parentheses, comma, 32 through 35. And that's the specific page number that we found the information that we have used in our own text. Those are the page numbers we found it on. Now on the bibliography, it's a little different. We're going to invert some information here. And again, that is to help the reader find the information more quickly. So we have, instead of Clay Shirky, we have Shirky, comma, Clay, Here Comes Everybody, The Power of Organizing Without Organizations. And then rather than including the parentheses like we did with the footnote citation, we don't include that. Rather, we just go New York, Penguin Press, comma, 2008. And you also see that we don't include the page numbers here as well. We see something similar with journal articles as well, so the scholarly journals that you'll be working with. So we have for the footnote, again, we've got the number that corresponds with the superscript that we have included in the body of the text. Similar to a book, we've got first name, last name, title of article in quotations, comma, title of journal, volume, issue, year. So we've got Lincoln Dahlberg, first name, last name, comma, in quotation, the title of the article, The Habermasian Public Sphere, Taking Difference Seriously. Then we have italicized the title of the journal, Theory and Society. We've got the volume 32, comma, the issue number 2, and then the year of publication, which would be 2005. And then we end it with a period. Bibliography, same thing as we saw with the books. We're just basically taken out, or we're flipping how we write the author's name. So we go last name, first name. So Dahlberg, comma, Lincoln, the Habermasian Public Sphere, Taking Difference Seriously. We've got that in quotations. We've still italicized the name of the journal. And then we have volume, issue, and that should say 2005 because nothing was being published about Habermas in 1005. But you get the idea. And again, same with magazines. So we've got first name, last name, title of article, title of magazine, date of publication, and the pages. So we've got, again, the corresponding superscript, or the number that corresponds with the superscript in the body of our text. We've got Bruce Barcott and Michael Schurer, comma, The Great Health Experiment, comma, time, 20 September 2017, 32 through 39. Now, in the bibliography, similar to the first two that we looked at, we are going to flip the first name, last name structure of just the first author. Just the first author. So here we see Bruce Barcott and Michael Schurer. Down here we've got Barcott, comma, Bruce, and Michael Schurer. So the second author and even third and fourth author, if there are that many authors, which you might run into, very reasonable to run into that, you would write theirs first name, last name, but the lead author who is ever listed first in the published work will be last name, comma, first name in your bibliography. And then now that we have looked at print sources, we'll now turn our attention to digital sources. And I do want to emphasize before we move on that even though you are going to be citing or locating your journal articles using online databases, so like JSTOR, Nexus Uni, and CQ Researcher, online databases like that, we would still cite them not as websites, but as academic journals like we see here under the second major bullet point, journals, when we looked at the Habermasian Public Sphere example. So again, even though you're accessing that information digitally, you will still follow this print-based type citation style. Okay. But now moving on to digital sources. And now these are sources that are pretty much born digital. Not that they were just uploaded to a computer, but that they were designed for online consumption. First, let's look at a website. Now, the first thing that we want to do with the footnote is, of course, we've got the number that corresponds with the superscript in the body of our work, and then we've got first name, last name. comma, title of web page in quotations, publishing organization or name of website in Roman. Now, when I say in Roman, rather than saying like dsu.com or dixie.edu, you would say Dixie State University. So much like we're about to see here. And then the publication date and or access date if available, and then the URL. Now with publication date, sometimes you'll look out and you will find month, day, year of when something was published. Like it will say, you know, July 4th, 2018. But more often than not, you'll probably just get a year of when the website was updated, and that is the date that you would want to include. So if we look at this example here, because there was no author identified, which is another common thing when citing a website, is that typically they don't usually include authors, especially if it's for a school or a business or an organization. It's pretty much kind of just the company or the school. And so then we omit that and we would go one, again, corresponding with our superscript in our text, and we go to the title of the web page. So mentoring and support, comma, and then we've italicized DSU Women's Resource Center because that is the name of the publishing organization. And then we've done comma 2017 comma and then included a link to the specific page. So again, this is the difference. We've got DSU Women's Resource Center, that's written in Roman, and then we've got the URL here at the end. Now that's for the footnote. For the bibliography, again, we just flip it. There's not much different. And so even here you can tell that it is pretty much the exact same. It is the exact same. So you just want to go through and do mentoring and support, DSU Women's Resource Center 2017. There should not be a comma there. It should be a period. And then the URL. But of course, if there was an author listed, then we would invert the first and last name. Now, the last digital source that we want to look at will be a blog. So with the footnote, again, we have the corresponding number there. And then we have first name, last name, title of post in quotations, title of blog, but we also want to put in parentheses blog. They're written lowercase, comma, date of publication, and even time of publication. With blogs, you typically do have access to that information and have the ability to include it. And then you close that parentheses, comma, URL. So we see here, Al Caraway, comma, that's the first and then last name of the author, how we've been teaching the most important thing wrong, end quotation, but then we've got blog in parentheses, comma, 23 September 2017, and then 5:23 p.m. in parentheses, and comma, and then the URL and a period. What's interesting with Chicago is that blogs are just typically only referenced in the footnotes. Whenever I've seen blogs referenced in any kind of work, yeah, they're typically only in the footnotes. They don't include them in the bibliography. And so if you feel so compelled, or if you are in a situation where your reader is requiring you to include everything, even a blog in the bibliography, you can use the same approach that we've seen and just flip the last and the first name. And so to say Caraway, comma, Hal, comma, how we became, or how we've been teaching the most important thing wrong, and then the rest of the citation. But again, it's not standard to cite blogs in bibliographies. Rather, you just do that in the footnotes. Okay, so what I would like you to do for the lecture assignment is I'd like you to review your current project materials and identify one source in your work. If you're working on project 1, perhaps that is the artifact that you're analyzing. If you're working on project 2, perhaps that is a source informing how you're talking about a perspective. And if it's for projects 3, 4, or 5, maybe it's an entry in your annotated bibliography or a piece of evidence to support your argument, either in kind of a traditional sense, like the essay that we do in project 4, or the multimodal redesign that we're doing in project 5. So regardless of where you're at, what you're working on, just pick out one source and cite it using Chicago style. All right, everyone, that does it for today's lecture. If you have any questions or if there are any concepts that I can speak to further, please don't hesitate to contact me. Okay, everyone, until next time.